We have an action-packed hour for you today, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in so that we can make good use of our time together. So, hello and welcome to all of our alumni and friends of the University of Michigan. My name is Kiara Trotter, and I serve as the Director of Alumni Career and Education of your Alumni Association. I go by pronouns she and her. We're honored to have Paula Dorita Wisher with us as we explore this month's career webinar topic, Navigating Job Negotiations. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Sorry, I have to make my cursor move. So first, this is an interactive webinar that is being recorded, and the recording will be shared in a follow-up email. Paula's presentation includes a wealth of resources, and so we'll also share her slides with you all. You're welcome to submit questions through the Q&A feature in your toolbar, and the chat feature is also active, so feel free to interact with other participants throughout the session right there in the chat. Many of you submitted amazing questions, and we will do our best to address them. But with almost 400 registrants, we won't be able to get to all of them. So Paula has agreed to stick around with us until around 1:10, 1:15, so she can answer as many questions as possible. And so now I'll share a little bit with you about today's speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce you to negotiation expert Paula Dorita Wisher. After graduating from Michigan with a degree in economics, Paula Dorita Wisher built her 35 years of experience in career and professional development, working with a multitude of organizations across a variety of industries, including the University of Michigan. She has held diverse and progressive leadership positions and brings a comprehensive understanding of the challenges of the workplace and job transition. She has coached entry-level to C-suite professionals in their job and salary negotiations. Paula excels at helping individuals connect who they are with what they do, leveraging their unique strengths to find joy, meaning, and fulfillment in their careers, fostering value-driven professional growth in her clients. And on a personal note, I had the amazing opportunity to work with Paula when she was my supervisor at the LSA Opportunity Hub. There's so much I can say about her, but I'll sum it up with this. Ah, Paula is one of the most genuine people I know. She's been a wonderful mentor to me and a fierce advocate for my professional development. She walks her talk, and I'm so happy you all get to spend some time with her today. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Paula.
Kiara, I didn't know you were going to say all that.
I know, surprise.
Yeah. Let me set my screen up the way I want to look at it. Okay. So I am very happy to be here today, and I'm so happy so many alums signed up to hear about this because I feel like negotiation is one of those things people think a lot about, but they don't really prepare for in a way that would help them advocate for themselves well. So I'm so happy to be here to do this. And I have been on both sides of the table. I have negotiated my own salary quite a few times through my career path. And, I was trying to think the other day how many people I have sat on the other side of the table as an employer and negotiated with, but it probably is close to 1,000. That sounds crazy, but it probably is. So I've seen a lot about what people do. And so what I'm bringing to you today are really concrete ways to think about this. And negotiation is an art, it's not a science, and you are part of the shaping of that. So please, though, I have slides and I'll be looking down once in a while at my notes. So if you see me doing that, I will work us through the slides. And I would really encourage you to ask questions as we go because it really enhances the conversation and it helps address things that I might be missing or that might be particularly interesting to you. So Kiara is going to be jumping in to help me with those questions as we move throughout. And I'm happy to stay after because I usually think there are spillover questions that come past the hour we spend together. So thank you to the Alumni Association for inviting me to do this. I'm excited to be here. So let me share my slides and get started. So we're going to talk about understanding how to navigate a job negotiation. And it really is something you navigate at all different levels, whether you're entry level, early career, or further on in your career, as well as if you're working. So I'm going to talk about all of those sort of things as we go through. But the first thing I want to ask you is to think about why people don't negotiate. Because I've sat across the table enough times to see people don't do that. And even my earliest negotiation, my very first one, I didn't negotiate. And why is it that people don't negotiate? And you can throw it in the chat if you want about what you think the reasons are. And Kira, if you see anything, let me know. And if not, I'll.
Absolutely. So far, we have fear of losing the deal, people feeling like they don't have any leverage. Oh, it's coming in fast and furious now. Anxiety of feeling like that you're asking for too much, feeling intimidated, not knowing what to ask for, questioning your own self-value.
Mm,
And what if you've received everything you've asked for? Do you still negotiate?
oh,
Being unsure about how to approach the conversation, not sure how to justify asking
oh,
for more, don't want to create enemies before you've even started, being turned down too many times in the
yeah.
past, being so excited for the role, you're just ready to accept, not knowing what's even left on the table, being uncertain about what the results will be. Money is a touchy topic no matter what. Um,
I'm going to interrupt you, man.
okay, there we go.
We
Okay.
could keep doing that because but people are spot on. What I find is people's reluctance to negotiate can often be traced back to one thing, and that's fear. And some people said some, I love the excited, so excited you just want to say, yes, I have witnessed that as well. So I understand why there's fear. It's something we don't do very often. There's this sense we might lose something. We feel like it's something we might not be very good at. I mean, there's all the reasons that you were putting in there. And what I'd like to do in this talk is to help you sort of flip the script a little on this. And if you can get rid of fear and think about opportunity to negotiate, opportunity to advocate for yourself. But if you can't do that, then I would encourage you to use that fear towards fearing not negotiating, because negotiation is an important part of the job search process. And like I said, I've been an employer. I have done negotiation quite a bit. And I want to share with you the employer's perspective to help you sort of loosen some of that fear, and think about it a little differently. And that's that most employers, or it says they may be thinking, but most employers are thinking it's acceptable to negotiate. I expect you to negotiate as an employer. I want you to accept the offer, and it's very professional to negotiate. So I am a little surprised as an employer, and I have been a number of times when people don't negotiate, particularly as they move up in their career. Although I think at every level you can negotiate, and I will talk about that because I think you're leaving something on the table if you don't negotiate, and often people have things that they want to talk about to make the position support a little bit more who they are as an employee. And so it is professional to negotiate, and I expect you to do that. I have so many stories about people who haven't negotiated, and the one that I love to share is when my second negotiation, like trying to remember, probably 35 years ago, I was sitting across from someone, and I didn't negotiate, and they shared with me the surprise they had that I hadn't negotiated, and it sort of a light bulb went out my off in my head that, oh, there is an opportunity here that I'm leaving on the table. So that's something to keep in mind as we move through this. You are in a position to do this, and the expectation is that you will. And if you notice at the bottom of the slide, there's a link to a resource that talks about that a little bit, about 73% of employers expect candidates to negotiate. There are links throughout this whole talk, and they're at the end too. As Kira said, we'll be sending you the resources so you can look at those after today's session. And there's lots of resources that can talk about what I'm talking and even provide more language for you as you think about it. So, how do you negotiate? How do you get into this process? There's three things I always think about: reflect, prepare, and practice. Now, I find a lot of people reflect. They think about negotiation, and maybe even do a little bit of preparing, but they rarely practice. People rarely sit down in front of a mirror, in front of a friend, and whatever, and practice this back and forth, or with someone that you feel like a career coach to sit across from and really practice what you might say. And the reason this is important is because you don't negotiate usually in your head. It's usually in a conversation, or perhaps typed to someone. So it's important to think in detail how you want to respond. The other thing that's important, and I'll talk about this as we go, is to make this your process. So what I can do is different than what you can do based on who we are and who we're negotiating with. So the ability to say words out loud will put you that much more close to something that is authentic to you and feels natural. And the likelihood you're going to do something is very much tied to the having done it in the past. And so if you've never done it for real, the practice will get you closer to the likelihood you'll do it. And so it's really important, when possible, to start before you get the offer. And Kira, I bet you've got a question.
I do have a question, and this is related to what you were just talking about, and I'll put it in the chat for everyone. Does it reflect negatively on your future performance if you don't negotiate? So, will the employer think differently about you in the future if you didn't negotiate?
That's a great question. And I can't be inside of all employers' head, but I love the question. I don't, I'll speak for myself. I never felt differently about people, but I did coach people once they worked for me about the negotiation process because I really felt you get a sense of people's career experience from how they interact through the interview process. And that non-negotiation, whether it's accurate or not, gives a sense of someone who doesn't have as much career experience. So it sounds almost counterintuitive sometimes. You think people would appreciate that you're not negotiating, you're just accepting the offer, but that negotiation is a natural part or an accepted part of the process. So I don't think people are going to think differently of you. I don't think it'll affect how work and what's going on, but um, it does give me pause sometimes when people don't negotiate. I don't know if it'll change any of your outcomes, but it's a great question. Um, One possible, as I was saying, start before you get the offer. And thanks for the question, by the way. I want to make sure people feel comfortable asking questions. And if you start before you get the offer, you're going to be much more ready if it pops up at odd times, which we'll talk about. But let's talk about where you start. First of all, calculated jobs worth. There's so much out there that has salary information on it. And what you have to think about when you're looking for how much is this job worth and what might they pay me are data points. I always say just like get in the arena, plot out where you see averages or the range of things. There are a lot of sites where people report their actual salary. Glassdoor is an example of that, and even give more information about their experience and other kind of benefits. So it's worth doing some reconnaissance and some investigation before you do anything else. And at some institutions, like at the University of Michigan, people's salaries are posted. And so you are able even to look at what the most recent um, report was on salaries. So be at the very baseline, get some data points that you can use to determine what the actual dollar amount will be for a salary. And remember, things matter to you beyond salary. And they don't just matter to you because it's important for you to have a vacation time. They matter to you because they represent compensation. So things like health benefits, life insurance, 401k, and retirement, those things, parking fees, you will notice some organizations have much more robust benefits than others. And it really is a form of income for you that you don't pay taxes on typically. Well, it depends on retirement things. But so it's worth knowing what matters to you beyond salary. And also, and we can talk more about this, but some things that matter to you beyond salary um, might be negotiable and some things might not. So if it's a very large organization and even sometimes small, health benefits, things that are sort of aggregated across the organization are harder to negotiate because there's equity issues across the organization, or there's things they have set for employees. But there are other things that might matter. And the example I always share is when I took my a job at the Institute for Social Research here at Michigan, and I came in. My husband and I had delayed our honeymoon, and we had planned it for the summer. I had just taken this job. I didn't have enough time to take off, so I negotiated the days to have off, and they paid me for them. And so even though I hadn't earned that time, I was able to take that vacation. That's a one-off that they could do for me because I negotiated it for my particular circumstances. So think about that. And the other thing I always say is think about like kind of a back pocket set of things. And even that example I just gave you is an example of that. So when I negotiated the salary with them, I was coming from corporate to non-corporate setting. And so they couldn't meet my corporate salary, and they were very conscious of that. So my understanding was that vacation time was a way for them to in some ways compensate for the fact that my salary was going to be lower, though I took the job because I really wanted the job and I knew the salary would be lower, but that helped getting that vacation time. So that's an example of to think about what matters to you beyond salary. So let's get a little bit more into how an employer thinks, because this will help you in being a good collaborator with the employer. Because I always encourage people to think of negotiation as a collaboration between you and the person who wants to hire you. So it helps to understand a little bit about what they're thinking. So here's a pop quiz. From an employer's perspective, when you counter an offer, what does the employer consider most? And I'm going to let Kira see what comes in. You can put A, B, C, or D, or all, or whatever.
Oh my gosh. We have some C's, D's, definitely not people's grades when they were at U of M. We have an A in there, a B. Yep, mostly C's and D's.
Okay. Those are
Oh, the
good.
A's are coming in hot now. Okay.
Yeah, those are all good thoughts that people have. Most definitely, an employer thinks about when they're hiring you, your experience level, your education level. They think about how much they want to hire you and they're excited for that. And they even think about the market value of the position. But the thing that is toughest for them actually is salary equity within the organization. They think about that most because when you come back to counter, remember the question is when you counter an offer, they're thinking, I have a range either that their HR person gave them or that it's been set in some sort of way, and they have a team they might be working with, and they need to be respectful of that range and that team and the equity they've created and the salary structure across the organization and the title of the position and how the equity based on salary is measured out by that. So when we're countering as employers, we're thinking a lot about that salary equity. And it's not that this change necessarily what you think is a fair salary, but it helps you understand if you go way out of a range with an employer and they're like, I can't do that. It won't work for our organization. This is what they're thinking about. And it might mean for me as an employer, if you go out of my range, that I have to um, reclassify a job, or you might be asking for money that's more than your supervisor makes. There are things like that go through someone's mind. And countering in that sort of way is important to know that employer is thinking about that. But to be sure, they care about all the other things too. It's just that salary number falls within a structure, and it's important to understand that. I always get the question, how much more higher can I go from what they offer they give? And that's, depends on the organization and their salary structure. But if you think you were offered $70,000 and you asked for $7,000, that's 10%. If you're getting offered $140,000, 5%. So if you're thinking in those sort of ways, it helps to um, it helps you to think about what that number might look like compared to the offer you have. So something to keep in mind from an employer's perspective. Now, what I'd like to spend the rest of the time, and I'm looking at the clock, so we have good time for that, is how you negotiate. Because I think a lot of discussion around negotiation is theoretical and negotiation theory, and really what I want to encourage you to do is to think about what happens in a negotiation and how you do it. Most of us don't do it that many times in our lives. So exactly, how do you negotiate? How do I negotiate? I'm going to start out first with this question. What are your salary requirements? I'm sure if I could see all your faces and your hands, I'd say, how many people have been asked that? And I'd get a lot of hands going up. And you get asked it in a couple different ways. You sometimes get asked it in a form that comes to you, in an email form or an online form or in an email. And sometimes you get asked face to face. And I want to encourage you to be ready for this question because what are your salary requirements is not a job offer. It's a fishing trip and it's for the employer's benefit. I don't want to make the employer seem like the bad person, but what we're trying to do as employers is get a sense of people's range and what expectations are. So sometimes in advance of an actual offer, early in the interview process, you're asked this question. So if you get it on a form, you get that blank spot that says salary expectations, requirements, whatever the line says. I would encourage you, if you can, to write in there negotiable or market rate. Just don't put a number in there. Sometimes it only takes digits. And so if you don't put a number in there, it won't proceed. You can't proceed. If that's the case, this is where your research comes in handy. And you can put in there the range or a target that you have done research on. Now, that research is important because if you're too high or too low, it may bump you out of the system. But if you've done some research, you will be more likely to be in the ballpark. And not every system bumps you out. So I don't want to foster fear in that, but it's something to keep in mind. You want to be knowledgeable, have some idea of what the range is. Now, I'll say this too. If you get to the end of that interview process and you get an offer and you think that number I put in there does not represent what I want to negotiate, forget about that number. And don't let an employer say to you, but you put that number in it's like, yes, now that I know more about the job, this number seems more uh, a fit for what I'd like to ask for. And we'll talk more about what exactly to say, but don't let that number make you think that you're tied to it at the end of the process. Now, you might get this question in person, like while you're sitting across from someone, they might ask you, what are your salary requirements? And often this is an HR person who is trying to check some things off their bucket of things they need to know. Sometimes it's your manager. I've seen people, I actually had a boss who did this once, just off the cuff said, what do you think it would take us to hire you? And we were all surprised they asked this in the interview because it's not really an offer when there isn't a number on the table that you've been given. So if you get that question, and it's important to think about this in advance, because when you get it, if you haven't thought about it in advance, you're not as prepared to answer it. So how to manage that question? If someone says, what are your salary requirements while you're sitting across from them? Here are some suggestions. This is something I'd be happy to discuss when I have a more complete picture of the position in the offer. Now, I said that in a certain way, but I can imagine if I were surprised by that question, I might say, oh, I'd be happy to talk about that when there's an offer on the table. That it matters how you're establishing a relationship when you're talking to people. So if someone asks you a question prematurely, it's like, oh, I appreciate you asking that question, but I'm not quite ready to talk about it. It has a different tone to it. So thinking in advance will make you more ready to answer this question. In fact, right now you're already more ready because you're thinking about it. Here's another way of saying it. Compensation is an important topic, and I look forward to discussing that once there's an offer on the table. But right now, I want to concentrate on my qualifications and expertise. Again, and it's funny, every time I do this, I rearrange these words because I realize it's going to roll off your tongue in the way it should for you. So that's why practicing how you want to say it, what you want to say is important. The point is you want to say, this is early in the process, and I want to get a better sense of what's going on before I start negotiating for the offer. And if you say it with a smile, you'll probably say it with less sort of protectiveness and maybe in a more collaborative way. And so it's important to think of how you want to say it. And if you've got a great way to say it, I would love if you'd send me a little LinkedIn message on it because I love hearing how people work with their own language in doing this. My favorite response, though, is the third one I have on there, because really, if the HR person is asking you, what would you expect as a salary requirement? They know what the salary is. So I would say, oh gosh, that's a great question. You have more information than I do. What would you expect to pay someone in this position? And it flips it right back on them. And you might get them saying, well, that's why I'm asking you. And say, well, really, we're early in the process. So I'd love to hear if you could provide some perspective on that. It would be super helpful. And sometimes they'll push and say, I have to have a number because they have to fill something in. That's when you have to give a range perhaps or a number, and say right now from where I sit, this is what seems possible. And as we get through the process, we'll have a better idea if that's accurate. Again, practicing helps you come to your own sense of how you would say this. So now that we've sort of taken care of the premature salary question, remembering that when you're asked this question in advance, you are not being given an offer, they're fishing. And I will tell you, when I was sharing that earlier example of the person who asked me, why didn't I negotiate more? I actually threw out a number to him that was super low. And he said to me, oh, he said, that's kind of low. We need to go a little higher. And it really taught me a number of things. One, about salary bands in organizations. I had been so low, I was below his salary band, which was a little embarrassing. And the second thing was that he had asked me for a number before he gave me one. And I probably should have turned it back on him and say, what do you think a fair offer is this from your seat? So I learned a lot in that moment early in my career about really waiting for the right time to negotiate and negotiating. Okay. So let's move into what I call a real offer. And I have four things I would say that you might say if someone were to say to you, we'd like to offer this position to you at a salary of X per year. There are four things you could do. Clearly, one of them is my preference, but I want to talk through each one because each one has some learning behind it. One is if someone offers you a position, whether they say it to you or email it to you or however you receive an offer at the end of a job search process, you could accept the offer immediately. Someone said that early on. I'm so excited. I just want to accept it. And that is perfectly acceptable. That is really up to you. And I will say you potentially are leaving money on the table. Many employers hold back money for negotiation. That's why we want to negotiate. Also, I'm always a little surprised when people accept right away because I expect that there might be questions that you have that aren't related to even salary, but just to the offer and things like that. So accepting it immediately again is a really not to your advantage. It's important to, even if you don't want to negotiate the salary, to take some time to think about it. You could negotiate on the spot right away, say, here's what I'm thinking, because you've thought about it in advance. I would say, keep in mind that the person across the table from you probably has done this way more times than you have, and is probably more effective at negotiation. So you might want to wait till you're less sort of emotionally charged and able to reflect and think to come back and negotiate. I also don't expect people to negotiate on the spot. It's a rare thing. So when the people do it, it's just almost as surprising as when they accept it immediately. I will say at higher levels in organizations, like at CEO levels, sometimes people do that. And I will also say that one time when I had an offer, it came in low for a job I really, really wanted. And I went back and said, this is lower than I was expecting, and I'm going to come back with a different number because the person I was negotiating with, we got to know each other really well. And I said, and I want to make sure I'm talking to the right person. Like we talked a little bit more about it. So in the moment, you might make a decision to talk a little bit more about the negotiation, but typically not in the moment, negotiating for a specific number. The fourth example is turn down the offer on the spot. In my feeling, that's just sort of poor form. It's like if you're building a relationship with someone, you're moving along and it seems like you're getting along and you say, hey, you want to go for coffee? I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not interested. Turns out I'm not really interested in you at all. I think that you really want to think about as you're working through an interview process, when you get to the end of that process, the expectation is that you're interested in the position. That's why you've gotten to the end of the process. So even if you think, I'm just going to turn this down, take some time, step back, breathe through it, and then come back and talk about it. Even if you were to say, despite this wonderful process and all the wonderful people I met, this is really not the right position for me. If you do it right in that moment, it'll be a little surprising to them because they'll think you thought this sooner than this moment. And why didn't you tell us? So the best answer, I think, and again, this is what I think, it is an art, not a science, is to thank them and ask for more time to consider the offer. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. And I'm going to do it step by step. Okay, step one, you get the job offer. Thank the employer. It's important to separate the job from the offer. And what I mean by that is the work might be super interesting to you, and the offer might be something that is disappointing to you. So if you can hear the offer separate from the job and show the appreciation for that without accepting the position. So really excited. I appreciate this offer. May have time to consider this, and I'll show you some language in a minute. And if you ask for time to consider it, have a time frame in mind. Consider what time frame works for you. And if you are a new grad from Michigan, you might be in the position where you're interviewing with a lot of people from job fairs and doing things like that. And you know, if I accept this now, I don't know if this is going to be the right position. And so, or you might have something going on with another organization that you want to follow up with. And you think, I know I want to follow up. So ask for a time frame that works for you, not one that you hope they'll agree to. And what I mean by that is if you think you need a week, say, thank you for this offer. This is a really amazing opportunity. I need some time to think. Would it be possible for me to have a week? If you don't give them a time frame, they're going to ask how much time, or they're going to give you a time frame. So you have to be ready with that. if you know, for example, you're a newer grad and you think, I need a month, I'm in the process of doing all this, you might say to people, you might say to the employer, I need a little more time. Is it possible to wait a month? Would that even be possible for you? If you know it feels like a stretch, that collaborative way of speaking, like it would be really helpful for me. They might ask you if there are other people you're interviewing with, what your reasoning is. And I always encourage people to think on a need to know basis. What do they need to know? And they don't need to know who you're interviewing with. They don't need to know all your personal or private job search details. But again, from that collaborative perspective, thinking, I want this to work out for both of us, you might want to share. I have other organizations similar to this that I've been in the process with, as you can imagine. And I really want to take some time to make sure I'm thinking clearly through this. If that is something that you feel you want to share with them, it might be there's some things I need to consider from the offer, and I'd like some time to reflect on that. Consider what you want to respond to when they say, or what you want to say when they ask, is there anything we should know in the process about why you're taking time? Sometimes they just understand that you want to take time. So you get a job offer. Step one, thank the employer, can have some time, know the time. Step two, consider the offer. Make a list of questions to ask. It's really difficult for people to go back and forth with questions. So if you say, I have 3 questions, and then you go, I have 3 more, you want to be ready with a set of questions if you come back to them so that you can get this process going in a fairly organized way. Close the gap on other organizations. I cannot emphasize enough how sad I am when I lose a good employee to another organization because they didn't tell me they were in the process of talking to someone else. And I just said it's on a need to know basis. But when I had an employee once who I wanted to hire, just thought they were fabulous. We were moving through the process. University of Michigan, a little slower the process was because a lot of people are involved in the decision making. And when we finally got to the offer, they're like, oh, I just accepted another one, and I really would have liked to accept this one. And I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't you tell me? Because they felt like I can't share that with you. And I was like, so let me know if you have another offer that's out there and you think if they just knew I had another offer, it might help move the process along, let them know. See if that's possible. See if you can speed up a process at all. And then decide what you want to negotiate. And when I say that, I mean decide what you want to negotiate from the perspective of what is first up and what's second or third up. I've had people come to me in a negotiation and say there's like 8 things I want to negotiate. And it's you really have to prioritize. It might be that those 8 things are all important to you, and that's all the things you want to talk about. But ask yourself, what absolutely do I want? What's my best offer? And then what would be secondary? And I said those back pocket things. If they don't come through with this, and this might make a difference. Think through what matters to you in that negotiation. So people do a lot of this, but they don't do step 3 very often. And that's why I highlighted it and italicized it. Practice multiple responses. Practice how you want to say, I would like to negotiate. And I'll give you some examples before you reach back to them. Practice how you want to do that. Another question I always get is, how do I respond? If they call me, can I email them back? Or it's important to meet them where they are. So if you get a call and you say, and they say, could you call me back? Call them back. Don't email them back. If they're negotiating via email, then you can do via email. Sometimes in a call, you might say, there's some things I want to send you via email to confirm. That's okay. But you also want to meet them where they are. And you also want to negotiate with the person who reached out to you and is negotiating with you. However, if you were working with a manager or someone who you knew would be a direct report to that you really liked, and you think, this is the person who really seems to want to hire me, but now this HR person is someone I don't have a relationship with and it feels a little different, you might circle back to the other person, not to negotiate, but if you want some things clarified, things like that. What you really don't want to do is pit anyone in an organization against each other. Like, well, the HR person said this and you said this, and or hey, the HR person is really not helping me. You don't want to put people in an awkward situation with their own colleagues. It's more encouraging them to say, these are things we talked about, and I'm wondering if it's possible to still have these things be on the table. I have not heard that from the new person I'm working with, and I want to make sure I understand fully. Again, you're building a relationship with an organization when you negotiate. Step 4, counter and discuss the offer. So you did all that, you got the job offer, you considered the offer, you practice responses. Now you want to consider and counter and discuss the offer with the person who's negotiating with you. So I'm going to go and give you some potential responses. And I'd love to hear if there are any questions, or if people feel like when I give you the responses, there's anything else you would might say. Did you have something, Kira?
Yeah, Paula, just so you know, there are plenty of questions. So you don't have to worry about that at all. There's no shortage.
It's so funny in a webinar because like there's people out there. I'm like, feel free to ask them if you want to, Kira, or hold on to them, whatever.
Yeah, we're getting close.
Okay, good. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure people, my chat didn't keep you from asking questions. Okay. Here's what you do when you counter. First, restate your interest. So you call them back. You say, hey, I'm very excited to be offered this position. In addition, I'm very pleased with the flexibility of the position, the team I'll be joining. So this is the appreciation part. First of all, I just want to say thank you for this offer. This is exciting. You want to sort of set the table. State your desire to negotiate. There are two areas I'd like to discuss in regard to the offer: salary and start date. Let's start with salary. Now, it's important to think about, don't make this, there's so much we have to go over. Make it, I like the team, I like the job. Just one thing we need to talk about is the salary, really showing you're closer together than farther apart. Provide reasoning, your research. After researching the market value of this position and considering my expertise in this area, a salary of this would be appropriate. So provide the reasoning for what you want. Sometimes people don't. They'll say, I'm excited about this. I like to negotiate the salary. This is the one I'd like instead. And then the employer might say, what's your reasoning? But it's nice when you can provide that. And then allow time for response. And the reason I put that there is because often people an employer will stop, they'll be thinking, and the person will start talking because you're nervous, and you want to allow time for response. Let them sort of sit on what you've said in that conversation before you start talking. Your greatest strength will be silence, to be honest with you, because now we're getting into the negotiation part of that. And silence encourages other people to speak. You speaking conveys sometimes nervousness if you're just, and sometimes prevents them from even thinking about it. And I've had people say to me, and this is salary I want, but of course, if that's too much. And then it sort of lowers my expectation that they really expect that salary. And it's a hard thing to do. I'm going to say I know it's hard to do when you're feeling nervous, or you feel like you want to have a good relationship with someone, or you're afraid you're going to lose a job, which I will say just in a moment right now, since I just brought that up. I think some of the fear is that if I negotiate, they will rescind the offer. And I have twice had a client have that happen to them. So I'll be real honest. First time was Pfizer in Ann Arbor here. The person went back to negotiate and the offer was rescinded. And then Pfizer closed down 2 months later. So there was clearly something going on in the organization. So when they went to negotiate, it gave the organization time to reduce the amount of employees they were going to have to let go. The other time was someone who said, when I said to them, I want to negotiate, they said, you can think about the offer, but we're going to continue in our process. So they gave them a heads up that they might lose that offer. And the person didn't necessarily interpret it that way. They could have said, tell me more what you mean by that, and made a decision from there. It is rare that an employer rescind an offer. And I will say, if they do, it says something about the organization. And I know that jobs matter and you don't want to lose a job, but an organization that would rescind an offer because you're negotiating says something about that organization. Okay, so let's go to actual words. What you might say it differently, but here's some suggestions. I'm very excited to be offered this position. Regarding the salary, I was thinking more along the lines of X, given what I see my value will be in the work group and my experience here. Thank you so much for this offer. I'm excited to work with this team. My research tells me the range for this position is X through X. And given my experience, I would find this salary would match most to what I would contribute as a part of the team. If you give me a range and don't give me a specific number, I hear the lower end of that range. That's just the way it works. So give a number. Thank you. I appreciate the flexibility of this position and the staff I'll have the opportunity to work and grow with. There are two areas that I'd like to discuss, salary and start date. First, let's discuss salary. Again, as I read this, I'm clearly reading. You will find your own way to do it. It's that appreciation, it's that identification that you want to negotiate, and it's the items you want to negotiate. Oops, before I go there, I want to say one more thing. I had a client one time who it was actually in a workshop I did where the person was negotiating between a very low cost area and a very high, California was the other area, it's super high cost of San Francisco. And the San Francisco offer was just like blowing the other one out of the water. So they knew I can't compare these two offers. I can't say, hey, I had this other offer, so can you match it? Because it would have been very unrealistic. But what they did do is they used that offer to say, I appreciate your salary. However, I have this offer in California and I know we can't get to that number, but could we get closer to that number? And so it was a way of using an offer to raise the salary without giving a number. So there's, again, creative ways, depending on your circumstances, to share what your expectations are with an employer. Okay. I want to take a minute because it came up in the questions, and also I think it's important to encourage you to think if you're currently working and salary is something that would help retain you, how you negotiate, or you just want to have, you feel like your salary is not at an equitable level or whatever reason you want to negotiate your current salary with a current employer. Here are some suggestions. And this comes from the article that I've linked here. So it's a great article. So, you can hear this, but also read it later. If you're negotiating with your current employer, there's some things you need to do. One is conduct an honest and insightful performance review on yourself. Really say, what have I done? And I mean, from a positive perspective, like, what have I contributed? Where are there areas where I have made some impact in this organization, where my unique set of abilities or how I work or whatever has brought some value to this organization? Know your worth. Again, look at numbers. And sometimes it's a little easier internally. What are people paid? What's happening regionally? What are ways that you can demonstrate your salary is maybe out of whack or you want to go higher? And if you're working with someone in your organization who has a similar job, in the US, we rarely ask people what their salaries are. We feel it very private, even though we share all other kinds of stuff. We don't share salaries. So if you said to someone, I'm curious what jobs like ours, what the ranges are, you might get them to share a little bit more about it. So there are ways you can ask some of your colleagues if there's some information you're seeking. And then practice your pitch before you go. And then practice it some more. Talk to yourself and like how you're going to talk to your employer, the things that matter to you, and create a visual aid that provides your evidence for why you're asking this to your supervisor, which could include specific impact, which also includes salaries you've reviewed. What you're doing is you're kind of doing the work for your supervisor so that they can make a pitch to the HR people for you. And do this before your annual review. When annual reviews come around, we've already decided where all the salary is going. You don't want to go in and at that time. You want to do this before. So when your boss is sitting down to say, or your employer is sitting down to say, where are we going to parse out our increases to, they have this information about you already in their head. So this is sort of a 1 to 5 thing to think about. I've done it. I've coached people on doing it. It's very possible. At the very least, and this is true about any negotiation, if you try, you will feel, I believe, differently that you tried than the frustration of, I feel this, but I haven't even tried to change it. That's what I think even negotiating a job at the start is about, is at least you made an effort to get what was available to you, and you don't wonder if there's something on the table. So that is what this slide is meant to address, and there's a resource in there. One other topic I want to hit on that's kind of that is related to negotiation is the fact that people hold biases around identities. I'm not surprised. I'm sure people know that, and it's not in a negotiation process. Some gender identities might want to consider negotiating differently, or at least understand that there's expectations that people negotiate in a certain way. So some negotiators may penalize people who present as women when they ask for more salary because their expectations are that women will be nice and they'll be cooperative. In other identities, there's also these expectations of how people act. So if you go at someone differently than their expectations are of you, it can not always work in your favor. You can't control how they think, unfortunately, but you can control how you act, or you can think about how you're going to approach this in a way that gives you a little more leverage and a little more agency. And one approach, I think, in general to negotiation is to counter by identifying the communal benefit by talking about teams and what you're going to contribute to the organization and the value you bring versus what I need, what I want, what I deserve. I think anyone who negotiates like that tends to create much more of a point counterpoint and less of a we're working together to get the best outcome here. So I have a couple links in this slide that will get that talk about some research, although dated, that has been done on this, and also some good strategies, particularly for people who present as women. The other topic related to negotiation that I want to bookmark and talk about is handling multiple offers. I think people think the best way to get another job offer is to have, excuse me just for a second, is to have a job offer in hand from another organization that they can say, see, they're going to pay me this much and you should too. It actually, that isn't necessarily as powerful as you think, but it is helpful to let people know that there are other job offers that you might be receiving. So if you have multiple job offers, first decide what offers do you seriously want to consider? What offers really matter to you? Because when you negotiate with me, I assume you're going to take the job if we can come to some agreement. And if you're just negotiating to get a letter from me so you can bring it to another place, like I said, that doesn't always work and you might burn some bridges. So consider, who are you serious about? And as I already talked about, update the hiring representative, the person you're connected with on a need to know basis. You don't need to share company, job, or salary info with them. If you say to someone, I have another offer and it's higher than yours, they might ask you for a letter to prove that. That has happened. And then other organizations say you can't share this letter with anyone. I've had people show me letters and then not give them to me. So there's lots of things around what you share and how you share it to consider when you're updating the hiring representative. Ask for more time, or if the decision could be made sooner. So if you're with an organization that you really love, like that one person I told you about could have come to me and said, hey, I have another offer. Could you speed your process up or give me an idea of where I am in the process? I would have said, you are our number one candidate and we're working as fast as we can. It might not have changed their decision, but it might have. And it was frustrating to me to not been informed about what they were doing. And that's where I have another offer, but I'm extremely interested in your organization. Can we discuss options at this point? Kiera, what's up?
So we have a lot of questions, Paula. Is now a good time to transition to that part?
It's a great time. Give me time to sip
Okay.
some tea too. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you for upvoting questions. This is awesome. So we'll just jump right in. And then I will also paste these into the chat so you can see them, Paula, but also so that everyone can read them. All right. So first question, any specific tips for negotiating at U of M? I've been told by admins that certain schools, colleges, or units don't negotiate. So I've never felt empowered to do so.
Oh man, I love that. Always negotiate, always negotiate. I have worked in many of the schools and colleges in Michigan over my 33 years. Um, and it depends on the unit, it depends on the person. I would say, what's the worst that can happen? And people think, oh, I could lose a job. The worst that can happen is that you don't increase your salary, even by a few $1,000s over time. That has an impact on your increases at Michigan in particular. So I would say always negotiate. You have a lot of information about what people receive at Michigan, so you have a lot of agency and power when you go into that. So that's my advice on that. I've never heard a blanket or experienced a blanket experience where someone didn't negotiate. I mean, that school doesn't negotiate. So good question though.
All right, the next question is if you're looking into opportunities in places outside of the United States, how does this concept of negotiation change? Whether it be cultural or what benefits are available in other places, unlike the United States, et cetera. Are there any resources or tips that you can offer this
You
person?
know, that's a great question, and I'm going to look for resources for that. I think it's being aware of cultural norms is obviously the most important thing is being able to understand. In the U.S. we're so direct in certain ways that might not be received the same way, and that would be by culture a different way of thinking about that. So I think that you have to be aware of the cultural norms. If you're planning on a job there, that's important just in general. Um, and how salaries are done, too, because the US is a very specific, I'm speaking completely from a US, and that's where most of my experience is, has a very specific process for salaries. And you'll want to understand that for the organization you're in. And also if it's US based organization in another country or based in that country and within that culture. And there's so much on the internet that can help you with this. So I think that kind of research would be super important before you did this. I know that's not as helpful as you probably would hope, but it's what I advise.
Yes, and thank you for being willing to share some additional resources. All right. Next question. I know friends that accepted an offer before graduation and continued their job search even after. And when, if they secured a better offer, they went back and rejected the initial job offer. Does this reflect poorly on the person? Is this something that you'd recommend doing?
It is not something I would recommend doing. I'll be really honest. And I understand that sometimes happens where you make this decision. I think intentionally accepting an offer and then just keeping going to me strikes demonstrates a lack of understanding of the commitment it takes to hire someone. And so it's really important to understand once you engage someone, they think they're hiring you, they let other candidates go and other people move on. And you've really impacted someone's hiring process and might even make it impossible for them to hire for a certain cycle. So it's considered unethical by recruiters. I just think it's poor form, but you can do it. It's possible. Like you can do it. I also think that it would burn a bridge. People know each other. And so if you're in the same industry, if it's like U of M's a great example, people talk to each other. You want to be thoughtful about how that's going to impact you. I always feel like I never want to tell people you can't do something because if you can do it, you can do it. It's just asking yourself, is it worth the impact on myself and my reputation and what I'll do to this organization? And then make the decision from there. I do know that some people have done this because something has come up and they just absolutely had to make a different choice. And that's a different approach, I think, than just collecting job offers. Oh, did I lost your
There we
sound?
go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's like, is it me?
All right. Some form of this question came in during the webinar, but also as submitted with RSVPs. So I'll ask this. What do you suggest in fields or organizations where they typically don't negotiate? Many say to negotiate, but given states with salary transparency, fields where negotiations
Mhm.
are truly not the norm. How do you approach this? And then a specific example that someone shared was being a teacher and having a sliding salary.
Yeah.
So, are there any specific, I would say maybe like field specific advice that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to know that because the same way that not negotiating when you can seems odd, when you know that there are restrictions, government organizations will often be like this, like the set salary, ask yourself, what is it I want from this offer? And if it's a start date, are there other things you can negotiate? Is it, space matters a lot to people. It matters to me for sure. So, thinking through what matters to you that will make work work for you. And the salary isn't always the thing. I always say money can't buy you love. And there's a lot of research that demonstrates that after 6 months, if you don't love other aspects of your job, the salary is not going to compensate for that. So if you know, and if it's become very clear you can't negotiate a salary because you've done your research or the person's told you and just clear, make sure those are those back pocket things. What else, if anything else, will help you or support you in feeling like this job works with your life? It's a job. I mean, there are limitations to what you can negotiate, but there are things that you personally might find matter to you and that don't matter to them, and those are great things to negotiate.
Thank you. I'm having trouble pasting this one into the chat, so I'll read it out loud. And if you'd like me to put it in the chat, please let me know. I've been given a verbal, this one got a lot of upvotes, by the way. I've been given a verbal offer and asked if it's acceptable before giving me the written offer. The excuse was they needed to get approval from higher ups before providing the written offer. Is this normal?
Yeah, I think people need to know what's going to go in the letter. If you've agreed upon that salary and they're like, okay, now I'm going to put this in a letter, it's more like if the whole thing's done and you've seen nothing in writing, then there's an issue there. But if they're like, I've had that experience, like we'll send a letter, they'll say that doesn't work. How about this number? Okay, we agree on that. And then I rewrite the letter and resend it. It's again a little different than what you're saying because you said you didn't get anything in writing, but it's more at the end of the process. If at the end of the process you receive nothing that confirms your salary, your benefits, then you'll want that. Another way, though, that might sort of ease your heart and all the upvotes it's got is saying to someone, is to email someone and say, thank you. I'm excited that we agreed upon this number. I'll look forward to receiving a letter from you because then you have an email trail. If there's something that's making you feel like, I need a little more evidence, that is email is wonderful that way because it can enable you to have something time stamped and sent to someone directly that you have possession of. I think I
Thank
answered
you.
that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So just a reminder, everyone, Paula is going to stick around with us for another 10, 15 minutes or so. So if you're able to stay around and ask more questions, hear more questions being answered, please do so. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So please, everyone, join me in thanking Paula. You can give her some hearts and lots of love. We're really excited to have been able to spend some time with you,
Oh,
Paula,
I
and
love
thank
it.
you for giving back to the U of M community. We want to remind everyone that a recording of today's session, as well as Paula's slides, because she wasn't able to get to all of them, but there were, really concrete tips at the end of the presentation, and links and all of that. So we will share that with you within the next 24 hours. We would love to hear your feedback. Brooke put the link to provide us with feedback in the chat. I do just want to spend just 1 second on this one. We read all of the feedback. Some feedback that we've received over the last several months is related to ageism in different people's experiences. And so we're incorporating that as much as possible proactively into our upcoming webinar. So please keep the feedback coming so that we can keep delivering. All right. I think that's about it. Paula's going to stick around with us, but thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you for all of the questions. Even if
Thank
we're
you.
not able to answer all of them here, we'll see if we can find some other resources to share with you. And hopefully we'll see you next month for our next webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we'll give everyone a moment to, do
Do
what
what
they're
they
going to
need
do.
to.
Yeah.
You can see.
And then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You can see what they're doing. So let me know if we're.
Yes, absolutely. And Brooke, do we usually keep the recording going for this, or do you want me to cut it?
Yeah, we'll keep
Oh
the
no, if I
recording
cut it,
going.
okay, do I need to pause it? Because if I cut it, it'll close everything out, right?
Just keep the recording going. We'll keep going with
Oh,
these
keep it going.
questions.
Sorry.
Yep.
Clearly, that's what you said.
I was gonna
Okay.
say.
I decided what you said. I didn't even listen. Okay. All right. So another question that came through, Paula, is this one. I've been told that if a job doesn't fit your salary range, then do not apply, especially for states that displays the salary range of jobs. What are your thoughts? Should you apply even if the job does not fit your salary requirements?
Well, you can apply, but you better adjust your expectations because they've given you the range. It doesn't mean you can't negotiate, but you got to know, like, what does that mean? Like, if it's so out of range for you, then the likelihood when you get to the end of that, and I've been with people like, well, I was really thinking way more here. Then you probably will find that to be a frustrating experience for you, and it'll probably be frustrating for the employer. You could use informational interviewing. You could talk and talk to someone in advance and say, hey, listen, I'm super interested in this work. I see your range and that it doesn't meet where I need to be. Could we talk about that and see what they have to say? If you know they're not going to, if they don't move on it and you know you don't want it, if they don't move it, it can't hurt to talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and really quickly, I had this experience where the range did not meet my salary requirements, but I applied anyway because I wanted to learn more about the position and see if there really was a fit and where I might be able to negotiate either with salary or otherwise. And it ended up working out way better than I ever could have expected. I agree, though, I did talk to someone in the organization to see, what they might be able to tell me. So I echo that. Um,
Yeah.
we have Pamela, who's had her hand raised for a moment, and I don't want to miss Pamela. So, Pamela, I think we have to take you off mute.
Oh,
Let me see if I can do that. Oh no, Pamela, please don't go anywhere. There we go. Okay, there we go. Did I do it? Okay, Pamela, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
hi, Pamela.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear
Yes.
you.
Oh, wonderful. I had put just a comment in chat. I didn't put it in the Q&A. I had a recent interview where a member of the interview committee said to me, "You get paid monthly here." And I was really surprised and shocked because I didn't expect to hear anything like that in my first interview. One of the reasons why I thought I received an offer to proceed to the first interview is that I answered some questions in the my task like file that they emailed to me, asking me about my salary range, why I was motivated to apply for the position. And I guess I said the right things. And so they contacted me. But I wasn't offended, but I just felt that it was unprofessional for me to be told that by someone while interviewing for the first time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Pamela, could you share a little more? I'm sorry you experienced that something that felt uncomfortable to you. I'm not quite sure what was said at the beginning. I missed it. What did they
Well,
say?
the member of the interview committee, maybe about halfway through the interview, said, "You get paid monthly here." And I wasn't expecting to get that in my first interview.
Were I'm trying, and it might be just me. I'm trying to understand what they were responding to. Like, why did they say that? Like, I know that.
That was a question for me too, because I wasn't expecting it at all. And
Yeah,
I just felt that it was unprofessional. Normally, you find out things such as when you're going to receive, once you've accepted an offer and you go through online boarding, that you find out what what your pay dates are, but not in the first interview. And this
yeah.
is kind of threw me off.
Hmm.
I didn't know whether or not I wanted to continue talking to this particular employer, but they have urged me to apply for other roles within their organization because they liked my background, and I think the pay equity information that I entered was met their standards.
Yeah. I'm sorry you
Yeah.
experienced something. I don't
Yeah,
know if
and
you're.
I'm guessing maybe they wanted to be transparent up front.
Yeah.
especially since people know that, you may be engaged in lots of processes. And so in some situations, maybe they think that the more information they can give you on the front end, the better that will be for you, but also for them as potential employers. Thank
Yeah.
you, Pamela, for sharing that.
Thank
That's
you.
really helpful.
Sure.
Okay, we have another question, and I'll put it in the chat so you can see it, Paula. And it is, I want to negotiate salary, vacation, relocation, and bonus. Should I ask for all of these at once and prioritize, or one negotiation at a time? I think you touched on this in the presentation, to limit the back and forth, but is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, they sound like they're important to you. You might want to, in one of my last slides, I was saying, what's the best alternative to the negotiated agreement? So if you have this ideal sense, also think about what would be the second ideal, what's the best alternative, because they might be able to negotiate all of that or some of that. But to say to them, there's a number of things I want to talk to more related to salary, like salary and bonus. And I also am interested in things related to vacation and relocation. And I think you can kind of group them together and talk about them and say, here's what I'd like to talk about first. Because and ask yourself what matters to you. Because if you find suddenly that the bonus is really contentious, and then you go to salary, which was more important to you, you kind of put something that was less important to you, if the bonus isn't as much, ahead of something that's more important to you. So that's why I think it's important to prioritize. You can let them know these are the things I'm interested in talking about, but then talk about them in a way from the place of what matters to you most. Because some of those other things can be, they might find the vacation easier to work through. And if they didn't come through with you on something else, we're like, oh, well, we can work on the vacation thing because they feel like they didn't come through with something really mattered to you. So you have to be strategic in how you talk about it, but you certainly could bring them all up as these are all the things I'm thinking about. And as Kira said, at once, I wouldn't like come back. And there's one more thing, and there's one more thing, because I have to think about them together as the employer.
Thank you. All right, I put two more in here. The first one is, how do you navigate negotiations for roles where the business is creating a role for you? And the second is, what are realistic expectations in negotiating for people who are both, one, returning to the workforce, and two, changing careers?
Yeah, the one where that is created for you is a nice opportunity to really help them understand the market a little bit. I had a role like that. And when they first put the title out there, I was like, yeah, this title isn't going to fly. And we talked about it and they switched it for me. And it was because I knew I was going to have to, it was kind of a high profile job and I was going to have to sort of work with that title ahead of me. So I think it's important if you're to think of yourself, it's a new role, they're creating it for you, to sort of think of yourself as a partner with them. I'd like to partner with on you. I think this work is important, and here's some insights I bring to that. And there are two roles that existed for me, and that's how I approached them, and it was helpful because, and if you find what I didn't get to in the slides, if you find that someone doesn't come through for you, you can say, can we review this in 6 months? And that is what happened on one of the roles I negotiated that was created for me. Like, I do believe this is still important. Can we tag this for 6 months? I sent an email saying once we agreed to do that, and we did review it in 6 months, and they did respond to it. So it's when it's a new role, you have an opportunity to shape it and to also recognize, let's review this and make sure it's right, not too far out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you should, and those returning to the workforce and changing careers, negotiate like you're the boss, man. I just feel like you really have an opportunity to negotiate always. And your attitude towards who you are and what you bring to the table will help people come along with you. So returning to the workforce, remember not to discount things that you've done, even if they weren't paid or if they weren't as traditional in people's mind, whatever traditional is, that connect to the role, make it easy for them to see the connection. The changing careers, same thing. Like, there's a fresh perspective you're bringing. There might be really important insights that create a broader approach to something. Think in those terms about the advantages you bring when you're returning or when you're coming from a different space than the one that everyone's been working in. that fluidity is to your advantage if you see it in that sort of way, is how I think about that. Lean on your experience and your transferable skills in the negotiation. Absolutely, Brooke. I love it.
Okay, we were not able to make it through all of the questions, but we made some really good progress through many of them. Thank you, everyone, again, for joining us. Please look out for the follow-up email that we'll send you tomorrow with some additional resources, links, all of that good stuff. And then, of course, we are here all the time. So Paula is doing her thing, but we at the Alumni Career Program are here all the time. So you're welcome to send us an email too, and we will get you on the right path. Thank you so much. We'll see you next
Thank you.
month.
It was so fun to be
Thanks,
here.
Paula. It was awesome.